You were created to be an emotional being. Sometimes our strongest and deepest emotions can function just like smoke from a fire. If we're willing to follow the trail of smoke long enough, we can find out what's on fire deep in our hearts. And once we find where all the smoke's been coming from, we can begin to deal with the issue before it consumes us completely. Just like physical reflexes, your emotional responses were created by God. The question is, will you choose to ignore them, or will you use this smoke from a fire to find out what's really going on below the surface?
Awesome. Good job, Ashley, man. I heard that song for the first time when we were at the night of worship down in Jackson. I had no clue that was an Avril Lavigne song. I just remember Avril Lavigne as, he was a skater boy. Anybody else there with me? Yeah. Hey, man, it's good to see everybody this morning. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. We are wrapping up our series called Smoke from a Fire. Today we've been talking about some tough topics, anxiety, anger, shame last week, and today we get to tackle depression. Who's excited? Woo! Yes. My name is Chuck Van Hook. I'm the family pastor here at Journey. I work a lot with the students, 6th through 12th grade students, and it's a blast. And every Thanksgiving weekend, I get to hang out with the adults, with the big kids, because Jeremy gets a break and gets to get away, and he's up in Indiana with family, hanging out. He's on his way back, but I'm just thankful to get to hang out with everybody and see you guys today. So, like I was saying, I work with students a lot, and this past week I came across a blog article written by a school teacher that was comparing what a middle school 8th grader kind of goes through in today's world compared to 2008, right? Now, some of us in here were like, oh, 2008, that's not that long ago. It was 10 years ago. That's a long time. That was when my first daughter was born. I'm like, man, that's 10 years ago. That's a long time. But she tells this story about an 8th grader who, in 2008, let's just say they're in the cafeteria. They're going to take their tray up. Somebody has spilled some water or some chocolate milk by the trash can. And question real quick, just to poll the audience real quick. Chocolate milk in middle school, elementary, high school, right? It was all an option. Yes or no? Yes? Okay. The chocolate milk, this has nothing to do with today. I'm just curious. The chocolate milk at your school that you had the option to drink with lunch or breakfast, was it in a small carton? Oh, okay. That is a resounding yes. So no one had it in a plastic bag? You did? Yes. Okay. One person. Good. I'm not crazy. Our chocolate milk was literally, it was in a pouch, like a sealed bag that was just, and you had a straw and you just stabbed that joker in there. It was real easy to steal because you could fit milk in your pockets and there's not like corners pointing out like the carton. So I got a lot of extra milk. Okay, anyways, there's that. But all right, so this is a middle schooler in 2008 is walking to drop to put their tray up, slips on some milk, falls down, tray goes everywhere. You know, it lands on the ground and makes that loud noise. Picks it up real quick, runs over, drops it off, goes on about their day. People may snicker about it during the day, but he goes home after school and can kind of escape that reality of all eyes on him at school. He can go home. How was school today, son? He can blow it off and not say anything because mom and dad weren't there. They have no clue about it, right? And so she then goes on and compares that to 2018. Same situation, kid going to drop off their tray, slips, falls down in the cafeteria, but this time someone's got their camera out, recording it, shoot it up on Snapchat real quick or Instagram, and then the whole school's talking about it. And this kid is having to see himself all over social media looking like a fool, seeing all the comments and everything else talking about how big of a loser he is, and he doesn't get to escape that. He goes home and he lays in bed at night looking at this, seeing all these comments, everything else, and he just can't escape that. And I got to thinking, man, even as adults we deal with that, right? Like with social media, you screw up one time and you're a meme or you're viral or whatever happened. You know, if it's a big enough thing, you got a giant neck and you're all over Facebook all of a sudden, right? Poor guy, got arrested again this week. Right, but like you can't escape that. There's not like a school life and a home life anymore. There's not a work life and a home life. Everything is all intertwined with social media. And a lot of times, what students go through and what many adults go through too, I would say, is that we kind of get infatuated with it. And if things aren't going well for you, then you kind of can slip into the things like anxiety, depression, things like that. And it just kind of continues to kind of build in us. And when we talk about depression, we've got to understand one thing, like depression doesn't just like, boom, here's depression. Like sometimes, yes, but a lot of times, most times, depression develops, right? It starts off with some discouragement. Oh man, I lost my job this week, what am I gonna do? Or my boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with me, what's gonna happen? Or I totally bombed that test. Now I'm going to be grounded and all that, whatever. My GPA is not going to be good enough to get into the college I want to go to. My marriage is falling apart. My kids are terrible. Like whatever it is, it starts out with just this little bit of discouragement. Say, for instance, you're going to a Thanksgiving get-together and you've baked a chocolate pie, but it hasn't settled yet and it's sitting in your lap as you're driving across town, and your dumb husband makes a sharp turn and said chocolate pie goes all over your lap. And it looks like you pooed yourself. Discouragement, it starts there. I'm sorry, babe. That was rough. That happened last night. But it goes from discouragement, right, to despair. Discouragement to despair, right? Where you're just kind of sitting there, you're like, I still haven't found a job. I still haven't found another boyfriend or girlfriend. My grades haven't gotten any better. My marriage is not improving. My kids are still terrible. Right? You just kind of lose this hope. And then as that builds, you eventually get to a depression where you've just lost all joy, all hope in everything. And it takes everything in you to get out of bed in the morning. And I would think that a lot of us have been, I would say all of us have been in one of those stages before. Some of us now are in that stage of just depression. A despair has just grown, and there is no joy, there is nothing. You're just kind of like, what's going on? Well, today we're gonna take a look at a passage, and I want to share a little bit of my story of just kind of some things that me and my wife and our family have gone through, and just kind of battling through depression. And Bryce said it last service, but and we always say here, but your story is safe here. Now, we don't need someone to stand up in the back and just start rattling off everything about their life right now. It's not the time. But, if you want to talk with somebody, if you're going through some things, we're in the starting point after service, starting point room. CR is a great place to get plugged in on Thursday nights. But just know that your story is safe here because all of us in this room have got something that we're going through, got something that we're battling through. All right? So we're going to dive in. We're going to jump in here. Lamentations, yes, that is a book in the Bible. I didn't just make up that word. It is on page 664, if anybody has the same Bible as me. If not, and you can't find it because it is a little bit difficult to find, you can just look up on the screen here behind me. But the book of Lamentations is 5 chapters, basically 5 poems lamenting how terrible things are, how bad things are, all right? And some scholars, the smart guys that are way smarter than me, some believe that Jeremiah is the writer of Lamentations. Others believe it was written by different authors. But we're just going to go with Jeremiah for today. And Jeremiah is a prophet of God, right? Which sounds awesome. Oh, he's a prophet of God. He hears from God. Yes, he hears all of the good things and the bad things, and then he has to go and relay it to God's people. So it's really not that great of a gig. Like, you ever been the bearer of bad news? The bad news bearer? Anybody? No one likes the Eeyore person that has to come and share everybody and tell everybody the bad news. Hey, God is not happy with you, bud. But that is Jeremiah here. And in chapter 3, verse 1 is where we're going to pick up. And let me just say, okay, these first 19 verses we're about to work through, they are not encouraging. Okay? I'm just going to put that out there, let you know, don't get your hopes up. Okay. Verse 1. I am the one who has seen the afflictions that come from the rod of the Lord's anger. He has led me into darkness, shutting out all light. He has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. He has made my skin and flesh grow old. He has broken my bones. He has besieged and surrounded me with anguish and distress. He has buried me in a dark place like those long dead. He has walled me in, and I cannot escape. He has bound me in heavy chains, and though I cry and shout, he has shut out my prayers. All right, so we're going to walk through, we're just going to kind of dissect this passage here and work through some feelings that I personally went through as I was dealing with kind of a dark time in my life. That I believe that if you've gone through any type of depression or anything like that, you've probably been there with your relationship with Christ in those situations. All right, so we're going to dive right in this first one. We see it right here in chapter 3, verse 8. Though I cry out, he doesn't hear me. There's no answer. Anybody ever felt like that? Like, I've been praying, I've been talking to God, I've been doing all the right things, but God is just not listening to me. Anybody? Show of hands? No? Yes? Okay, cool. We got some brave people. That's what I'm talking about. I like that crowd participation. Yes, that God is he's just not there. He's just not listening to me. So back in 2016, 2015-ish, my wife and I began praying about adoption, and I've shared this story sometimes in here before, but we started praying about adoption, and we started walking through the process of adoption. And we selfishly started praying at the beginning because we had seen friends that had gone through the process where things just did not go smoothly, and they ended up not working out in the end, and we kind of saw the heartbreak in our friends during those times, and so we're like, we don't want that. If that's at all possible. And so we're like, hey, God is a big God. He's done great things in our lives, so let's pray a big prayer. And so we just prayed, God, drop a kid off on the front porch. Like, hey, that bird that flies around with babies, bring him to our house and let's just have this child right here, right? And we're like, we don't want all the difficult stuff. Just drop this baby into our laps and let's do the darn thing, right? And so we're praying that. Boom. It happens. We're like, oh, snap. He's listening. Look at this. This is great. And so we start walking through the process. We get the phone call just out of the blue. Hey, here's the situation. We're looking for somebody to adopt my grandsons. And we're like, sons, that's plural. There's more than one. Wait, what? It turned out to be twin 4-year-old boys. And we've got 3 girls already. And so we're like, okay, sure, let's do this. And so we keep walking through it. We're 2 years down the road, a year and a half, I guess, and it just seems like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Every time we started advancing and going in the right direction, something else would pop up. Some piece of paperwork wouldn't get filed. One of the parents would show up. It was just a mess. And we got to the first couple times like, oh, it's all right. We'll next time. We'll get them next time. It'll be great. Everything will be wonderful. And then again, and then just that despair started setting in my life. And the depression just kind of blew up. And I was there. I'm like, God, what are you doing? What's going on? You're not listening to me. You're not hearing our prayers. And so when we get in that situation, when we let that despair build and build, a lot of times we feel as if God is not listening to us. You're not listening. But Don't despair. It gets better. And by better, I mean not better. Verse 9. He has blocked my way with a high stone wall. He has made my road crooked. He has hidden like a bear or a lion, waiting to attack me. He has dragged me off the path and torn me in pieces, leaving me helpless and devastated. He has drawn his bow and made me the target for his arrows. He shot his arrows deep into my heart. Cool, that's fun. You ever think of God as the bear or the lion that's just waiting to jump out and devour you? Like, that's not, when I think of God, that's not really the first thing that comes to my mind. But Jeremiah here is saying, he's like, it's like you're out to get me. You ever been there? You're just like, man, nothing is going right. Every time I try and do right, something else bad happens. I take 3 steps forward and then there's 2 steps back. Every time I'm in the right direction, God, it's like you show up and you're just out to get me. I'm trying to do the right things. I'm trying to do everything. Why? What's going on? Are you out to get me? It continues. Verse 14, my own people laugh at me. All day long they sing their mocking songs. He has filled me with bitterness and given me a bitter cup of sorrow to drink. He has made me chew on gravel. He has rolled me in the dust. Peace has been stripped away from me, and I have forgotten what prosperity is. I cry out, my splendor is gone. Everything I had hoped for from the Lord is lost. And so it goes on, and you're in that situation, whatever situation it is for you, whether it's your marriage or raising your kids, or you're trying to figure out which college to get into, or your grades, or maybe you're walking through adoption and you've done everything that you're supposed to do, and then there's people in your life that are just not supportive, and they're just kind of laughing and mocking behind the scenes, and they think you don't hear it or see it, but you do, and you're just like, God, you've hung me out to dry. Why am I just out here in the middle of the spotlight? Where are you? All eyes are on me, and I don't know what to do. It's like God is just, hey, here's what I want you to do. Okay, I'm just going to leave you there and fend for yourself. Anybody ever been there? That time of despair, just like, I've just got no hope. I don't know what to hope in. I'm just out here by myself, hung out to dry. But here's where it actually gets a little better. Verse 19, the thought of my suffering and homelessness is bitter beyond words. I will never forget this awful time of I grieve over my losses. Verse 21, here it is. Yet I still dare to hope when I remember this. And so in the midst of all of this that Jeremiah is going through, and the people of Israel are going through, Jeremiah is like, all these things are terrible, yet I still hope in this. And we're going to get to the this in just a minute. But I want you to know, like, these next couple points that we're going to go over, I don't want this to come across like this is a self-help, like do step 1 and then do step 2 and then step 3 and then everything's great. That's not what I'm trying to portray here. That's not what we're talking about today. But as we read through this passage, we kind of see some steps that Jeremiah took. We see the way that Jeremiah was able to overcome these thoughts of despair and depression. But the truth, the bottom line is you got to do something. You got to do something. Anybody watch This Is Us? Anybody here? Okay. All right. So I'm watching the new series, right? And there's a guy named Toby. Everybody loves Toby. He's awesome. But Toby, I'm not going to go into the whole thing. But anyway, he battled depression his whole life, was on medication, came off the medication, and just fell deep into this pit of despair and depression where he's not getting out of bed, he's not leaving the house, he's not doing anything, he just wants to stay home. And I'm watching the show and I'm like, get up, do something, right? Which is easy watching the show to be that guy, like, hey, dude, just get out of bed and go walk the dog, whatever, right? But when you're in that pit of despair, for me, it was a shame thing, it was a pride thing. that I didn't want to admit that I had an issue, that I didn't want to admit that I needed help. And as we're walking through this process, and roadblock after roadblock after roadblock kept coming up in this adoption, and I was falling more and more in love with these boys, it got bad. I remember there was one day, Bryce knows now because I was told this first service, but I don't know if he knew that before, but it was a Thursday. I was supposed to go into the office like any regular day, and I dropped the kids off at school, and I'm like, nope, not going to work today. And I'm not going to tell anybody I'm not coming to work. They'll just figure it out. And I remember loading up my fishing gear and going down to Chickasaw out south and just went out there to go fishing. That's something that's kind of my getaway. That's what I like to do. I enjoy going out fishing. And so I showed up at the lake. I get out. I hike down to the pond, river, lake, whatever it is. And I start casting. It's like my second or third cast, and I hook a good-sized bass. I bring it in. It's probably 3-4 pounds, 75. I don't know. It's about this big. But I hook a good-sized fish. I bring it in. I pull it out of the water. I look at it, unhook it, put it back in the water. I cast 2 more times. And normally, if I catch a fish, I'm there for like 6 hours. I'm like, I ain't going nowhere. I'm going to be here all day, right? I cast 2 more times. And I'm like, nah, I don't even want to be here. Loaded up my stuff. Got back in the truck, drove home. I came straight home, went upstairs, got in bed, and just slept until my wife and kids came home from school. And it was at that moment that I'm like, man, this is something that I really enjoy, and I hated it. What's going on? At that point, I knew I had to do something, but my pride was too big. I didn't want to admit that I had a problem. But luckily, I had 2 women in my life that were like, you've got a problem, and made a phone call and set me up with a counselor. And then I started doing counseling and was able to go in and sit down and talk, and it was just therapeutic, and was able to walk through and past those steps. And as we continued on with the adoption, we had our good days, we had our bad days, but I went and I did something. So whether it's counseling for you, or coming to CR on Thursday nights and sitting around with a group of people who are hurting and going through stuff just like you, or it's medication, whatever it is, do something. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's go through these 4 steps real quick. All right, so the first one, recall the goodness of God. When you're going through the despair and the depression, recall the goodness of God. Think back on the things that He's done in your life, that He's blessed you with, the mountaintops and the valleys that He's brought you through. Recall that goodness. All throughout the adoption, as we're hitting these roadblocks, I'm like, what in the world? And Rachel would step in and be like, hey, remember when we prayed somebody would drop off some kids at the front door and essentially it happened? I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember that. I don't want to right now, but yeah, I remember it. Right? So recall the goodness of God. 2, the second one. Now this is not across the board, okay? I'm not saying that every time you're going through despair or depression that it's God trying to teach you a lesson because you were a bad boy or a bad girl and you didn't listen, so He's going to teach you. That's not what I'm saying. But a lot of times, as we walk through depression and this feeling of despair, there is a nugget of truth. There is some kind of lesson that we can glean from the situations that we're in. Verse 24, or 25, sorry. The Lord is good to those who depend on Him, to those who search for Him. So it is good to wait quietly for salvation from the Lord, and it is good for people to submit at an early age to the yoke of His discipline. Let them sit alone in silence beneath the Lord's demands. Let them lie face down in the dust, for there may be hope at last. Let them turn the other cheek to those who strike them and accept the insults of their enemies. She's essentially saying, hey, sometimes just sit back. Sometimes just take a look around and see if there is something there that God is trying to develop in you, something that He is trying to teach you. Remain teachable. Stay teachable. Because as I battled through it, I learned a ton. I learned a ton about my faith. I learned a ton about the issues and stuff that I had been carrying from my past. There was some good stuff that I learned in that period of time. Number 3, this one is a little annoying, okay? But realize that God's plans are ultimately for the good. I remember when we were going through this period with the adoption, people would always say, oh, God's going to work it all out. All things work together for the good of those who love him. I'm like, thank you. I went to Bible college. I know that verse. Don't say it again, right? Like, oh, God's got a plan. He's going to work. I know that, but right now, I don't want to hear it, okay? Sometimes we're in that situation, and if you're in here, you're like, oh my gosh, I said that to him all the time. I don't hate you. I was a little annoyed with you probably at that moment, but we're good now. We're friends, all right? But know that in those tough times, know that God's plans ultimately are for the good. They're ultimately to benefit us. They're ultimately to grow us and teach us, right? In verse 24, Jeremiah says, I say to myself, the Lord is my inheritance, therefore I will hope in him. Verse 31, for no one is abandoned by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he also brings compassion because of the greatness of his unfailing love. And then everybody's favorite verse, Jeremiah 29:11. Y'all know that one? That's a good one. It's on bumper stickers and stuff. You should know it. Jeremiah 29:11 through 14. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. In those days when you pray, I will listen. For you look for me wholeheartedly. You will find me. I will be found by you, says the Lord. I will end your captivity and restore your fortunes. I will gather you out of the nations where I sent you, and I will bring you home again to your own land. So as annoying as that sounds sometimes, understand and know that God's plans for you are good. It may be tough now, but in the end, there is that light at the end of the tunnel. There is that moment where you can say, golly, man, God brought me through all of these things for this because he is good. And the last thing, rise each morning and search for the goodness of God. Rise each morning and search for the goodness of God. Again, in verse 22, the faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh each morning. I say to myself, the Lord is my inheritance, therefore I will hope in him. Man, there were days when we were walking through the adoption. There were mornings where I would wake up and I just didn't want to do anything. And then there were days where I'd wake up and my wife would remind me of the goodness of God and all the things that he had done for us and how far he had brought us in the process. And another thing, as you're walking through despair and depression, is have somebody there with you that can walk through it, because if it weren't for her, I mean, when I had my bad days, she had a good day. When she had a bad day, I'd have a good day. We worked together. We were able to lift each other up. And every now and then, we both had bad days, and those were dark days. But for the most part, when I wanted to wake up and just go back to sleep, she was right there saying, get up. Remember the goodness of God, because he is good. And as I was preparing and reading this week, I was reading some commentaries, and I came across this one guy who was talking about this passage, and he made this point. He said, if you go back and you look at verses 1 through 20, okay, we read it and we put ourselves in that situation. We put ourselves in all of these verses. Like God he's not listening to me. He's left me. He's hung me out to dry, right? Where is he gone? What is going on in my life? Why is he not here? But he said, go back and put Jesus throughout that passage. And then read it, and I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds pretty cool. Let's do it. And so I wanted to read this to you just hit a couple high points from that verse, those verses in the Message. And just think, as I read these verses, of Jesus and what he endured and what he went through here on this earth. I am a man who has seen trouble coming from the lash of God's anger. He took me by the hand and walked me into pitch black darkness. He's given me the back of his hand over and over again. He turned me into a scarecrow of skin and bones. He ganged up on me, poured out trouble and hard times, locked me up in deep darkness like a corpse nailed inside a coffin. He shuts me in, shackles my feet, my hands. Even when I cry out and plead for help, he locks up my prayers, throws away the keys. He's got me cornered. He's like a prowling bear tracking me down, a lion hiding ready to pounce. He knocked me from my path and ripped me to pieces. When he finished, there was nothing left of me. Everyone took me for a joke, made me the butt of their mocking ballads, forced rotten, stinking food down my throat, bloated me with vile drinks, ground my face into the gravel. He pounded me into the mud. I've forgotten what the good life is like. Man, when I read that and I put Jesus in there, man, that is a picture of what he endured going to the cross and hanging on the cross for you and for me. And so as we walk through these tough times of despair and depression, and it's real easy to say, God, where are you? Why are you not listening? Why have you hung me out to dry? Know that he is good and that he is faithful and that his mercies are fresh each day, and not just when we're going through the hard times. His mercy, his grace is fresh each day for us, each and every day of our lives. It's been made complete by what he did on the cross for each and every one of us. So in a minute, we're going to come together as a church family, and we're going to celebrate that. We're going to remember what he did on the cross for us. All the things that he took and bore on himself, hanging on that cross for us as we take communion. And if you're in here this morning, you're like, hey, I just showed up because family brought me, and it's after Thanksgiving, and I'm not real sure about all of that. Just it's not a problem to just pass that plate to the person next to you. No one's going to look at you different. We say all the time here at Journey, you can belong here way before you believe the things that we believe in here. And so we welcome you into that Holy Communion with us as we celebrate what Christ has done for us, as we battle through and we strive on through the despair and the depression. Just know that his faithfulness, his mercy is new each and every day. Would y'all stand and sing this song with us?